So this is episode 2 of Growth Without the Hacks. Today, one of my guests is going to be Usman, a growth strategist with Omniscient Digital. Really excited to have him here. Probably one of my favorite hosters on LinkedIn, and really appreciate you taking the time to hop on the show, especially since it's 8 p.m. for you.
Thank you so much, Taylor. I've been following you on LinkedIn, and I can say the same things about you. All of your LinkedIn carousels, the case studies, I see them all. You're doing a great work. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for having me.
no, man, I really appreciate you being here. I feel like, especially with LinkedIn, especially with LinkedIn, there's just so much noise that's out there, especially in the SEO industry. And I always really appreciate when someone actually focuses on putting out value, focuses on putting out helpful content. And definitely, you're one of the people that I always can always kind of seek out when it comes to that type of content. I try to filter out the noise and stick with the people that I actually enjoy following.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the kind words. And I can totally agree with that. I think the overall space is pretty much filled with, it's definitely a lot more noise than signals. And, those kind of 200 SEO item checklist that we see, very basic stuff, things that don't work, but still people talk about them so that they gain traction and all of that stuff. So, but yeah, just trying to provide value, getting straight to the point.
Sweet. I'm gonna have quite a few questions that I want to ask throughout this podcast, but for all of my guests that come on, I always just want to ask them like a really random question that's not doesn't even have to deal with SEO or our professions in general. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is just mostly out of curiosity. So you're in Pakistan, right?
Yep.
What is your favorite dish from Pakistan? Like just favorite food to eat?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually not a big foodie, although that is pretty much against the culture of Pakistan. Like everyone loves food here, in Pakistan, in India, in South Asia, and in general. But for me, I would say biryani, which is, Pakistani cuisine. So we have rice and, a lot of spices. So like that is one thing that I typically enjoy.
Okay. Is there any meat in that, or is it just like
Yeah. So it goes with meat, usually chicken, but people here would do whatever they want. So, beef would also be cool. Or, for example, yeah, anything other than a few animals. So, yeah, but in general, biryani is like something pretty popular here in Pakistan. There are multiple cities, multiple regions within the country, and they have their own way of cooking it. So, but yeah, it's pretty much something ingrained in the culture of the country.
interesting? Okay. That's definitely good to know. I feel like for my next podcast episode, I mean, so far they've all been food related, but maybe for the next one, I'll try to stay away from food. So, okay, now that I got that out of the way, so I do have a few SEO questions that I do want to ask you. And I guess the easiest one or the most basic one I want to start off with is just how do you get your start in SEO? Like, where was like your first introduction into the industry, and how did you get started with SaaS and B2B in particular?
Yeah, it was a pretty weird journey. Perhaps most of the people who land in SEO have weird journeys getting into this field. That's at least what I've heard. So for me, I was in university. So I got started working in SEO while I was still in college, right? So I was just still completing my bachelor's. And I just came home from the college in summer vacations, and my elder brother used to have his freelance software engineering business. So he had a website, and since I had nothing to do, I was like, hey, can I write some content for your website? Maybe it will help in some way. I didn't know what SEO was. I had no idea what how search engines work, how this content marketing world used to work. So I just you know picked the site, started creating some topical content, blog articles like, hey, website development trends, right? Those kind of things, very basic. And that got me started. I figured out that, even if you write a lot of stuff, people wouldn't read it, you wouldn't gain traction. And there's this thing called SEO. Started watching some of the, in my early days, Brian Dean videos on YouTube. Like
Mm,
that's how
of course.
I got started. Um, and yeah, and then that led me to about one or two freelance content writing gigs. Very basic. I was not a really amazing writer at that point. Perhaps I'm still not, but content writing was something that finally got me into SEO. I understood that SEO is way more than just writing content, and it has to do with this big strategy thing that you build for organic growth. You can drive customers for businesses. This is a service that you can earn money from, build a career in. So I gained one freelance client, messed up his site, didn't charge him out of courtesy, right? And then finally, a few things happened here and there, landed my first gig as in, I would say, maybe a part-time role, started as a free internship sort of a thing, and then led me to a full-time role. And then from that point onwards, it has mainly been agencies, with one B2B SaaS company where I worked as an in-house strategist. The past couple of roles that I've had, so as of now, I'm at Omniscient Digital. We are a B2B organic growth agency, and the past two agencies that I was at were also in the same field, in the same playground. So we work with B2B companies for organic search growth. Yeah, so it's primarily has been in the agency world, and I've also gotten some taste in a B2B company, a SaaS company, as an in-house SEO specialist.
Nice. Yeah, I love what you said about the whole like destroying a website part, because honestly, I think if you want to learn SEO, really the best way to learn it is trial by fire, and you probably experienced that yourself too. Like really figure out like where you went wrong, and once you figure out where you went wrong, figure out what you can do to not go wrong the next time. But I've kind of had a similar journey to that too, where like most like when I went to college, like I studied marketing there, but all of the jobs I had outside of college were like event marketing. They had nothing to do with SEO at all. So once COVID came, that like wiped out that entire industry. So I was out of a job for quite a bit and just happened to pick up an internship in the SEO field. And ever since then, I've just like loved the field. It's just something just clicked for me, and I was like, this is something I want to keep going down.
Yeah.
This feels like the field for me.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I see it very rarely. Perhaps I'm not sure if even if I've had one case where someone came into SEO and then they intentionally moved out of it. Like, it's very rare for some reason. I don't understand why. Most of the people who have come into this field are, from other sort of careers. They had, for example, my last company had multiple people from a journalistic background,
Yep.
a media background, right? So very diverse kind of careers. But I haven't seen a lot of folks jumping out of SEO pretty intentionally. So yeah, just a pattern that I see.
But one of the questions I did also want to ask you too, and this is probably one of the topics I've been meaning to ask you for a while, because I always see you post a lot about just keyword research in general and audience research. And one of the things I really love when you talk about is just the focus on not using keyword research as an overall strategy. So I guess the question I just wanted to ask you is like, how common do you usually see that with most companies you work with? And I guess like, where do you usually see them going wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, I do see its occurrence quite often, to be honest. Almost every other company that I work with, let it be in a consulting gig or, for example, as a client at Omniscient, I do see them having very tactical approach towards creating content. So to them, SEO is all about putting the seed keyword in Ahrefs, exporting a list, and then just sorting based on volume and difficulty. And this according to them, is a strategic method, right? Like they think, hey, we have a pretty solid method because we use volume, we use keyword difficulty, right? All of these metrics. And for them, something very basic would be, let's write based on a rough ideas. So for me, the bar is even higher. And I think as SEOs, if you really want to drive major impact based on the kind of goals that you are pursuing, which is usually traffic to increase revenue, you have to start with something more foundational, right? So you have to build a deeper understanding of the customer, of the product, of the market in general, and then you have keyword research, the technical part of it. So yeah, so I see it quite often, even very big companies, because usually we would expect early stage startups to have this approach, but even bigger brands I've seen following this approach and not giving a lot of thought to the overall process of content creation. So again, if you just think about the problem here, right? We have keyword research. So you go into Ahrefs and or maybe SEMrush or whatever tool you're using, and you pick those phrase matching keywords, right? Those terms, you export that list, and then you use some sort of a prioritization model. The problem is keyword research tools can tell you how many people are searching for a particular keyword, what is the keyword difficulty, how hard it would be to rank based on backlinks, whatever. What they cannot tell you is who exactly is that searcher, right? So when someone is searching for something like what is email marketing, how would you know if that person is a director of marketing at a company or maybe a college student looking for a definition, right? Like it's really hard to figure out who what are the exact topics that my buyers are specifically searching for, unless you spend time in customer research, which you can do in different ways, I would say. So customer research, for example, could involve customer interviews, looking at customer reviews and gaining insights out of it, talking to your own teams who are facing those customer personas on a daily basis, support, sales, success, right? That's the Brandon Hufford framework. So yeah, and again, the idea is to finally use all of those insights and then turn them into a content strategy, which still involves keyword, but not abandoning keyword research. It's just, buckling it up with deeper customer insights.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely, like you said too, it is something that I commonly see with most companies, just like completely ignoring the audience who's actually like when they look at a keyword, it's just what is the search volume behind this keyword, not where is this keyword actually coming from. So I guess one of the kind of taking this a step further, one thing I am curious about is once you have that audience research, how do you usually kind of tie it into a content topic? Like how do you like find the search that is coming from the audience and matching it with the audience research that you had before?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, the way I think about customer research is you have to figure out a couple of things. Starting from the absolute foundational level, right? So you first of all need to know who exactly am I targeting, right? That is your basic persona. Maybe you have, a marketing director that you want to reach at a SaaS company or whatever, right? So you define that person's role and their company and all of that stuff. Very basic. The other stuff would be what kind of problems do they face, right? So their pain points, their motivations, the stuff they care about, and what exactly are they trying to solve for, where your solution can potentially come into the equation, right? So that would be the pain points part. The third element would be, I would say, the terminologies that they use, because customers often have in a specific market specific terminologies that they often use, right? Like maybe a very basic example of this would be, let's say we have a software like Google Drive, right? We know it stores files, right? That's what the product does. I think there would be two different personas. One would describe the same product as a file sharing software, and some other persona which is more sophisticated and they have a very different kind of a use case with the product might call it something like cloud management software, right? Like two very different terms, and that terminology difference is something that you should build an understanding of. So those 3 to 4 components I would layer first in my research, which can then be done in different ways, right? As we spoke about it, it's interviews, customer reviews, many different forms. Now, once you have that information, right, once you know, hey, this is exactly what my buyers care about when they're looking for a solution, when they first face a problem, that becomes the trigger. So again, if I'm thinking of Google Drive, what exactly happened that made me think I need a file sharing software, right? What is the problem that occurred that made me think? Now, if you put this into a B2B SaaS setting, you can ask the customers like, hey, was there a specific metric that made you think, hey, we need to optimize this? Maybe for a customer success software, let's say, that would be that they wanted to reduce churn and they wanted to maybe smoothen the onboarding and they wanted to increase the NPS score, right? So all of those pain points you can then treat as big topical themes, right? Like, hey, my buyer cares about reducing churn. So churn reduction becomes a topical theme that they are really interested in. And then you layer on top of it a funnel direction for content creation, right? So you say, we're not going to target the top of the funnel stuff. They already know about that. What is reducing churn as a definition? I've figured in my research that my customers are not a big fan of all of that basic content. So we're going to, totally remove that content out of the equation. And what we are left with is, let's say, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel content. Now I have clarity, right? I know the topical themes. I know the funnel stages. I can simply jump into Ahrefs, make a list, and I would exactly know what keywords are relevant or irrelevant, right? And then from that point onwards, you do your classical stuff, SERP analysis, content creation, all of that stuff. But again, what this adds is a lot of clarity that when you have a big chunk of keywords, you can just scan those out, which you think are irrelevant based on your analysis, your research.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think especially in that sense. I mean, you pretty much nailed it right there. That's a whole piece of the puzzle that most companies are neglecting there. Like when you're starting at the stage with keyword research, you're ignoring all of which came before it, which what does your audience actually care about? And I think especially in the sense of what you were talking about with like interviews and demo teams, like those are like a gold mine for content ideas. Like they are on the front lines when it comes to actually like talking with your audience. Like those are the people you want to start with. And then once you have those ideas, you can basically take that, use it. And I actually like what you said about instead of finding the specific topics, you can find the overall topic and just kind of
Yep.
maybe dive into it a little bit deeper and then use Ahrefs to figure out the keywords that might fall underneath that category.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So you don't need to specifically stick yourself with a very specified niche sort of a topic cluster. You can actually think more in terms of themes, right? Like, hey, these are some of the blocks that my customers are interested in. And now I can do my classic keyword research. Of course, you can still think about traffic potential, keyword, volume or whatever, but that comes at later stages, right? Like that gains very less weightage compared to other factors, which is more on the relevance side.
Mhm. And I would also say too, especially when you come to the table with audience research, like if you're creating content, you actually know what your audience actually wants with that content. Whereas if you're just doing keyword research, you don't really know what your audience is looking for. Like I see this like pretty commonly where someone will or a company will create a piece of content and all of that content will either be completely branded where they consider that content to be basically a sales pitch,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't actually answer what their audience is looking for. So when you start at that stage of audience research, then you'll at least have a better idea of kind of like how you can kind of serve the intent of what someone is actually looking for.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And in general, you see this difference on a pretty big scale, right? Like for example, when it was very recent, I was building this content roadmap report for a client, pretty big company, and while doing the research, right? Like we already have the strategy in place. We're just figuring out what content pieces to create in the next couple of months. So we have a direction to follow, right? Already, and it's all about just tactical part now. So I'm doing the keyword research, and one of their personas were engineers. So we looked at some of the keywords, very raw manner, right? Like Ahrefs, just looking at big reports. With a quick eye scan, I could feel myself not being very confident. Like, hey, would someone really search for this and buy the software? And then afterwards, in the next couple of days, I had some chat with my elder brother who happens to be a software engineer, right? So I used him as an SME because he also used to use that product. That product is pretty mainstream, right? It's a pretty big company. And I could totally feel the difference afterwards, right? Like just having chat about, hey, you use this product for exactly what causes, like, what are different use cases that you have lined up for this product specifically? So would you use this for, let's say, code reviews? Would you use this for something else, right? And he gave me a whole bunch of ideas, which then when we pitched to the client, they got approved pretty quickly. And they were like, yeah, this makes sense. It resonates with all of the research that we've done. And simply because I have that same persona that they're targeting on a very close proximity, and I can ask qualitative questions, deep level questions, and then of course use those insights in the keyword research. So it's a totally different game when you use customer research.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I like that you mentioned was also talking about strategy versus tactics. And we kind of touched on this briefly with audience research versus keyword research. But I think one of the things I really do appreciate about what you post is just like putting a heavier emphasis on focusing more on the actual like strategy of your SEO and not just tactics of like updating a title tag or like updating a meta description. So I guess one other thing I'm curious about is like where did that initial mindset come from where you really put like a hard stop on like, okay, we need to set the strategy first, and then once we have the strategy, then we can kind of move to the tactics we want to go after.
Yeah, so I remember when I was first getting started, right, in a local agency. I'm working as an SEO specialist, and we have a bunch of clients to work with. I I could see how painful the process felt, right? How disconnected it felt, especially from the client point of view, from their perspective. Like, why exactly are we doing this? So we
Mm.
had a bunch of items in a checklist. Like, you came in as a client. We're gonna pick 5 of these pages, and then we're gonna re-optimize them, etc. We don't know why we're picking those 5 pages specifically. There's no thought process. We don't know why we're changing the title tag suddenly. Why is it so important versus, some 100 other things that you could do. So basically what's lacking is strategic thinking behind it, right? You simply are not connecting clients' goals with what you can accomplish. Because of course you can accomplish so much, you can do so much. There's so much opportunity on the table for any project. You have to prioritize, and that prioritization you do based on the client's goals and objectives. So it felt like no one is actually thinking about what they're trying to achieve in the first place, right? And let alone build that connection. So that was mainly the point when I thought maybe I shouldn't follow this checkbox marketing approach. Maybe that is where I should go deeper, right? I should build a deeper understanding of what they want to achieve, what are their growth objectives. And I don't mean this in a very vague sense. I mean in a very specific, objective, number-oriented sort of a form. So just asking the client, hey, what is your primary objective with this SEO strategy? What is it that you want to make happen? They would be like, we want to increase revenue. Cool, that's one. How much revenue, right? Do you care about revenue coming from the same number of customers if we increase the deal size? Or for example, you care about increasing the number of customers, right? So just like getting to the core of it, understanding what exactly they care about and what is it that they want to achieve, that helps you build the strategy afterwards and separate the tactics. So I'm waging this war on tactics, although I still think tactics are, the foundations of a solid strategy. So I would say when I think about this, if we try to operationalize building a strategy, like how exactly you do it, I would think about it in multiple components. So the first one would be building an understanding of the objective, right? Identifying what the objective is, what exactly is it that we want to achieve, the goal, and then think about all of the opportunities you have, right? So opportunities for a large site could be maybe some technical SEO optimization, right? Maybe you can just fix one subdomain that is getting indexed that should not be indexed, and maybe you can improve the crawl rate for the rest of the site and thus improve the overall quality of the site. For maybe other sites who have resources to build links, maybe they can use link building, right? So you can, like, on a broad spectrum, on a bird's eye view, you can say, these are where the opportunities lie. So what are the opportunities? That would be the second thing. The third thing would be figuring out what are their competitive advantages, because I think every SaaS company, every B2B company has some sort of an advantage, right? Maybe they have a lot of SME knowledge within their own company, right? Maybe they have customers that we can talk to, because that, believe it or not, it's not so easy. So there are so many different forms of competitive advantages that they can leverage. Maybe they have a lot of user-generated content that they can use to drive more traffic, right? So figuring out what your competitive advantages would be. The fourth thing would be, and this is something that I've started to think about more lately, strategic narrative. So what is the philosophy of the company? What is the angle that they want to push to the market? And they want to use SEO as a channel in order to push that narrative to the world. So, imagine there's a company like, perhaps Refined Labs would be a pretty good example of this, right? So they have this agency, they talk about all of that demand creation, demand capture thing. Say whatever you want about the company and about the person running it, but they have done a pretty good job of just building their strategic narrative and then pushing it out to the world. I think about this in the same way for SEO, right? So you can say, hey, this is my narrative. So when I write a piece of content on, video conferencing best practices, I also want to speak about when do I think meetings should actually be a Loom video, right? Or something like that, right? So that's like my narrative, my philosophy about the problem. And that is what will make you unique. So, and of course, the fifth component, already spoke about that, just building an understanding of the product, the customers, and just, using those core insights to inform the strategy. Those are the 4 to 5 components that I think about. And what's interesting is you can use the same exact components to build a strategy for a very small scale startup and a large company, right? You would, of course, have clarity on some fronts and vagueness on others, right? Like a small startup would know, hey, we want to increase traffic, but we don't know how much opportunity out there is. So we cannot give you a revenue number or something like that, but you can still run with it, right? So broadly speaking, from a bird's eye view, these would be some of the facets that I would be thinking about when I'm building a strategy. And if you just couple these things together and you have clarity on these fronts, then you can, of course, lay out all of the tactics that you want to start execution and, achieve all of the things that you wanted.
Great answer, man. I feel like there's a lot to uncover there, but that really fantastic answer. And I have so many questions that I do want to ask, but just for the sake of time, you kind of brought it up towards the end of your answer. But when you were talking about early stage startups and versus more established companies, obviously most of them are going to require like a different approach to how you handle their SEO. So I was just a little curious too, like what difference do you usually see in how like a startup should prioritize SEO versus a company that maybe already has the brand like authority built up, a brand presence, just is more established overall?
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, so generally speaking, I would still stand my ground. If you use those same components, you can think of a strategy for a small scale startup as well as for a pretty big enterprise. Now, if you're thinking of a small SaaS company, B2B space, and they have, let's say, a large TAM to capture, they're not in a very small niche. They're just an underdog, but they still have a big market to capture, right? Maybe let's say a project management software competing with Asana, Monday, ClickUp, right? In that case, what comes to my mind is if they think about their customer, their product, let's say they have this huge TAM, right? So we have, this project management software that can be used by product managers and software engineers and marketers, right? All of these different personas, and they're trying to capture everything at once. If you think about it, even from a data perspective and also from the founder's own philosophy when they were starting the company, you would realize there are some of these personas where their product really thrives, right? So maybe they built this project management software for everyone, but as of now, agencies can benefit it, a lot from it. So maybe that is like one small area where they can try to dominate first and then try to move up market. So if we just use the same sort of a methodology, I would say from an SEO standpoint, what those companies can, as a project management software, as an example again, they can try to play within that territory, right? So target long tail keywords, large questions that agencies specifically have around project management, and all of those transactional terms that they can go after, and avoid intentionally all of those big aspirational terms and topics that they can go after, right? So you shouldn't create a page if you're such a small startup for a term like project management software. Like you shouldn't even consider it, of course. So that's one, I would say, just like finding what exactly is that small territory that I can dominate right now, and then we can aspire to move up market in the future. And that informs your entire content strategy, right? So again, you think about this from a customer insights standpoint, product insight standpoint. It means you have these insights. It excludes a big portion of topics, keywords that you could have gone after, but you're not going after because you want to focus on agencies, right? Maybe that one persona is where you see the least churn, you see deals closing pretty fast, etc. So you can identify that playground for content creation. And then the other part would be, I think, just moving fast, right? Like for small companies, I feel like there's such a big advantage compared to large enterprises that the time when they find an opportunity, right? Like, hey, this is a keyword, let's go after it. Versus large enterprises, the approval process, the review processes, right? All of those logistical things take so much time. So I think speed is the superpower for small scale startups, and they can totally leverage it. I remember as of now, there are some projects going on and I can see a big pushback, and in fact, like weeks and months of approval time for different keywords that we're suggesting. So comparison pages, for example, is one thing where legal teams of a client is jumping in and saying, hey, I'm not sure, we're not sure if we can do these comparison pages. We're talking about competitors in a specific light, and we're concerned from a legal standpoint. A small startup wouldn't really care about that. And we're seeing those patterns. A really small company I'm currently working with, they're like, hey, we can do these. We can, create all these 50 comparison pages pretty fast. Let's run with them, etc. So they can clearly make speed their advantage. And of course, once you've earned some part of that market share, then, within that small territory, at least, you're unshakable. And then, of course, in the future, you can move up market. So I would say those two would be the two components I would be thinking about.
And I think especially when it comes to like SEO in general, like when it actually comes to the execution of SEO, like people really aren't considering like what the actual like process looks like for how they can best like set up their SEO campaign. Like if there's, I mean, maybe for a larger company, a bottleneck won't kill them, but if you're an early stage startup and you have a bottleneck in your content creation, I mean, it's really going to hinder the results you're going to see from SEO. So while you know you should be executing SEO, you still have to figure out what that exact process is going to look like. And if there's any bottlenecks, which I mean, especially for startups, bottlenecks are very common. Like whether it's the founder that wants to review all the content, they don't have content writers that can actually produce the content they should be creating. Really, I guess my advice there would just be like figuring out like what those bottlenecks are and then just removing them as fast as possible.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. It kills me when I see early stage SaaS companies or, any sort of B2B company, and they're just building their SEO engine from scratch. They don't have any non-branded traffic at all. No one is searching for them. No one is landing on their blog pieces, etc. But still, the founder is so concerned about how the introduction is phrased, right? Like, of course, you should be concerned if you really care about your customer and all of that stuff. But at this point, it's not a priority. You have to move fast. So yeah, exactly as you mentioned, if you just identify, hey, currently our bottlenecks are here, right? Maybe the approval process is taking so long, maybe we're not moving fast, maybe we're not identifying the right opportunities, etc. You just fix those ASAP.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think I would also say too, especially with what you talked about with the industry pages. I mean, like that's if you go after like a specific industry and you don't have as many competitors in that market, that's like a whole easy industry that you can cover with content. So, like you said too, you don't want to like slowly produce like an article per month because then people aren't going to become familiar. Maybe you'll kind of like capture some audience members who will find your article, they'll find what you have to say relevant and they might be interested in your product, but like you were saying, if you can kind of like control that industry and also scale up content to like have content that covers that entire industry, that I mean that's pretty much how you win right there. And once you have that industry covered, that's when you can kind of take yourself to the next stage.
Yeah,
So I
totally.
think those are all great points right there.
For sure. And maybe just a small caveat here would be for any of the listeners. If you are a small scale startup, small company, you can still move fast even if you don't have a lot of capacity. So moving fast does not necessarily mean you should be publishing hundreds of pieces of content a month. Even if you can publish, let's say, two, they shouldn't take you 2 months to finalize, right? Like you can still get those created pretty soon and very fast. And of course, if you have that kind of resources and that sort of capacity, then you can put all of your energy in making those two pieces so fabulous that anyone in the SERPs would intentionally click on your page, right?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of a question that's going to tie in pretty well with based on what you were saying. But so I think as an early stage startup, especially if you don't have that capacity to either afford an agency to create content for you, or you don't have the capacity to bring on an in-house content marketer to create the content, I see a lot of companies kind of seeing as AI content, just like products like Byword, Jasper, as that like light in the tunnel type of solution where they think that's going to be the answer to all of their problems. So I guess what I'm curious about here too is like what are your thoughts about those two? Like when companies decide that they actually do want to go that route and publish like hundreds or sometimes even thousands of posts just with AI content.
Yeah, so I guess I should be careful. Jasper used to be Omniscient's client at one point. But
Mm,
anyway, no, but in general, I see what you mean. So, and I have a pretty solid stance on AI content creation in general, which is I think most of these AI tools are being used incorrectly, right? So I don't have anything against AI content. I think it can yield amazing results when used properly. So
sure.
in the case of AI content specifically, what I've seen, I've tested this with one website. I wouldn't necessarily rely on that anecdotal experience, but still, even based on industry standards, we've seen that all sorts of one-click content generation sorts of tools, including Jasper and many others, when you try to create a blog piece or maybe hundreds of pieces, whatever, based on one click that you're trying to do within the tool, the quality is usually pretty bad. Like there's no
Mhm.
question about it, right? And again, it's just based on multiple things that we just talked about. It lacks customer insights, right? The tool simply does not know who you're targeting, what are their pain points, how they should shape each of the piece, etc. Within the article. how to start with a pain point motivation driven sort of a angle, something like that, right? So they cannot do that. Customer insights is one. They lack subject matter expertise. Even if you have fed AI with a lot of training module, and that's how ChatGPT and many other LLMs are formed, still they lack the unique perspectives that your industry experts add, right? So if you think about maybe a definition, let's say that you ask ChatGPT to define what demand creation, demand generation is, perhaps you and the rest of the market have consistently heard Chris Walker talk about these terms, and now you have a specific definition of what those terms are, right? So your idea of what these concepts are have been shaped differently based on who you've been listening to. So again, a machine wouldn't necessarily know that unless it's keeping up with all sorts of information getting published on the web. So again, that's subject matter expertise, and then third, the same thing that we talked about, it lacks your company's unique philosophy, right? There's no unique angle. And perhaps you would know this, Taylor, right? But when we search for something related to SEO, right? Let's say I'm searching for a keyword like how to do keyword research, or maybe how to do programmatic SEO. These days, at least for me, and I'm pretty sure it's true for many others, we don't necessarily want these results from anyone on SERPs. We're looking for specific people because we know who they are in the industry, right? So I would click on Ahrefs' article because I want to hear what Ryan Law thinks about, right? I would think of maybe Brand Fishkin for other sort of topics. Maybe when affiliate marketing comes to my mind, authority hackers would pop up. So we have this affinity, right, towards different folks simply because they have unique angles, unique philosophies within about those topics. So I think these are the three core elements that we see usually missing with these one-click sort of AI content creation tools. On the other hand, another part of my brain thinks, why exactly are we thinking about textual content only, right? Like, why do we think that AI can only be used for blog posts? Or at least in the way that we are using it right now. So for example, if you read Google's guidelines and their stance on AI content creation, they're pretty clear. They're saying we don't care about how content is produced as long as it's high quality. And on a large data set, of course, there are some exceptions, but if you're just thinking about the data and what's happening in the industry, most of this AI content creation, as of now, it may change in 6 months, 12 months, but as of today, is pretty low quality. In fact, there are some really good examples that you will find. I think I talked about this in a LinkedIn post at one point. Google has specifically mentioned that, hey, we're not against automation. In fact, automation had made so much sense for content creation since the beginning. Think about weather forecasts, right? Think about maybe these stock prices going up and the forecast of all of that, right? So it's just a different form of content that AI has been facilitating, which Google thinks is valuable to the searchers. So yeah, and by the way, I wouldn't be against somehow engineering the AI-driven content and making it valuable, right? So for example, one thing that someone can do, and this is something that I've tried at one point, is if you just have a large set of data about your customer and you've documented, what your ICP wants, all of your customer interviews, all of that stuff, then perhaps maybe a custom chat GPT can, give you some ideas, right, that you can then use for your own research. And then maybe you can perhaps create one human piece and use AI to improve its quality. I do it every day with LinkedIn. Sometimes if I'm not sure how to phrase, specific bullets, I'll just ask LinkedIn, hey, here's a piece of content. I want you to add clarity to it, or maybe, just like phrase it in a compelling way or something like that. So I feel like what AI is being used as is more of a strategic writer, right, or content creator with years of experience, but in reality, it should be used as an intern. So that's the gap in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think especially with AI content in general, like I guess just AI in general, how you said it too, like Google is not going to penalize you just for creating like AI content. They're going to penalize you if you're just mass producing low quality content. So I think when most companies get the idea of using AI, like most are pretty lazy when it comes to it. Like they're not using it as a tool to support themselves. They're using it as a tool that can basically be an all-in-one for them. So they'll just say, hey, write me an article about like how to do keyword research. And then they take that article and then we'll post it online without actually like adding any human element to it. And especially with what you were saying about adding that like kind of like that personal brand led approach, or adding that like unique insight that only yourself can give. Like that's not something that your AI content can produce. And I think especially too with that whole unique insight part, I think that's like something I really wish more companies in general would take an approach of instead of only focusing on the brand writing content, like have your employees build the brand themselves and make them so they can consider themselves to be thought leaders. Like people want to connect with someone else. They don't want to connect with a faceless brand. So I think that's something that more companies need to consider as well too.
Yeah, for sure, totally. I'm thinking about this again very recently. I was writing this LinkedIn post about Reddit, right? How Reddit grew its traffic, all of that stuff. And I wanted to figure out like one question that I still had in my mind, after publishing the post was if Reddit is seeing so much traffic growth, what is the impact of it on its stock prices? And when I noticed its stock prices has not been growing that much. So I wanted to dig deep into this. What I did, I grabbed the earnings report of Reddit, right, for the past year, and then I just threw it into ChatGPT and I asked it to give me some insights about why, there's no correlation in the massive traffic uplift that we're seeing and the stock prices and all of that stuff. And there were some really cool insights. I'll perhaps write a separate post on that, but that sort of investigation, if I were to do on my own, it would take me, definitely hours. So just like, tearing apart the entire PDF and figuring out, are there some patterns that we can recognize within their earnings report that can show us some correlation with the traffic uplift and what might be holding them back, something like that. And that part is very interesting, very hard to do for human beings, time taking, and definitely a hassle. You should surely use AI for that sort of content, but then just like, putting into words and having no unique voice, nothing of personality, and just sounding robotic is something that never would make sense to me.
And I'm also glad you brought up Reddit too, because that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you too, because I did see that LinkedIn post you created. So I guess one of the things I was curious about, just with all of the growth that Reddit has seen in the past couple of months, do you think there's any, I guess not advice, but just how do you think companies should adjust to all of this growth that Reddit has seen? Do you think they should try it? I mean, I guess this kind of boils down to building a brand. Like, should they try to be featured more on Reddit or just is there any way you think that might affect how most companies go about doing SEO?
Yeah. So it's very interesting for sure what's happening with Reddit. It's absolutely bonkers at this point. Like, every single update, as they've been adding like 70, 80 million new users while websites have been hammering down, they've been growing. So it's pretty interesting. Of course, there are multiple reasons why that's happening. If we think about how SEOs and marketers in general can leverage that as an opportunity, I think about it in two different ways. One is simply using it as a distribution medium, right? So you know that Reddit is getting a lot of traction. Google will most likely continue rewarding it unless, their partnership breaks down or something, massive happens. So I think, of course, the one obvious thing would be to just distribute your content and build your affinity on Reddit. I'm not sure exactly how that works, like, how we can operationalize it within companies, as in, shall we tell our executives to now go and create Reddit accounts and, talk about specific things? But one thing is pretty clear that, there is interest on Reddit and there are subreddits for almost everything that you can imagine under the sun, right? So if you deny that the opportunity exists there or that your buyers are not spending time there, it wouldn't make a lot of sense at this point. So you should definitely be there. You should be using it as a content distribution medium. If you're creating blog content anyway, backed by, let's say, thought leadership, if you have some ideas that you're posting on LinkedIn, maybe Reddit can also be a good house for those ideas to be distributed and gaining traction. I remember I used to do something similar with Quora back in the days when I was getting started. It was very tactical, not very strategic, but I think about it in the same way, which is you don't necessarily want to, always drive referral traffic. Even if you just drive awareness towards your brand, even if people are not leaving Reddit after seeing your post, it still makes sense to me, right? Like there's just so much opportunity in terms of raw eyeballs. So that's one. The other thing would be just using Reddit as a, raw, I wouldn't say customer wouldn't be the most accurate word, but user feedback around a specific topic, right? Or user views on a specific subject. So if I'm searching for a keyword like, video conferencing challenges, right? Something like that. I'm trying to create an informational piece of content, a very SEO thing to do, right? We're trying to optimize a piece. Reddit can give you insights around what people face as challenge. So rather than you relying on SERP analysis to just regurgitate the same templatized sort of content in your own piece, you can actually use real users' experiences to inform the kind of content that you should be creating. Right. And again, like from a strategy perspective, I use Reddit all the time. I just, specific keywords, and then I put Reddit as a brand name in Google, try to see how people are searching for it. And then there are so many subreddits that you can do for research. So yeah, so I think in terms of shaping content and understanding like, hey, when people talk about challenges or maybe this one thing, best practices around a subject, around a topic, these insights are coming from real users. This was a CTO of a company and he posted this on Reddit. This is good information, right? It's again just gathering subject matter expertise in a different shape. And then on the other hand, it's just using it as a distribution platform and trying to gain eyeballs.
Yeah, I was gonna say especially. I mean, first off, great answer. But I was gonna say especially with Reddit too. Like it's one massive subject matter expert. Like you said yourself, there is almost a subreddit for everything. You have like r/startups, r/SaaS, r/human resources, whatever your ICP is like focused in. They likely have a subreddit there, and yeah, I mean, you could pretty much do a search of that subreddit, see the type of questions that people are asking about, how comments are falling under those posts, what they say they're dealing with, how they want to fix it. So it really can be pretty useful for either finding content ideas or just finding ways where you can make your content able to resonate with people who read it more. So I think, like you said too, you don't want to just go about like using the SERPs and just rehashing everything that's out there. You want to add something new to the table, and Reddit's probably the best way to go about that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the initial idea that we were talking about, right, knowing who your searcher is, which is something that keyword research tools cannot give you the information about, all of the information that you find on software aggregator sites, right, like G2, Capterra, and of course Reddit is a big part of that equation. All of this can cluster the same information for you, right? They can tell you, hey, this information, these challenges, these best practices, these tips, I've found from a real person who's talking about this and he belongs to this, right? Like he's a maybe CMO of a company or maybe a marketing analyst, whatever. So you can find your persona and you can figure out what they're talking about. And I would in fact like take it one step ahead. There was a strategy that I was building for a client about 2 weeks back around pricing as a subject. And I just like searched on LinkedIn because of course you don't necessarily need to get on calls with SMEs all the time. You should do it if you can, but there are so many other ways to do it. And just like doing a normal search on LinkedIn, there's so much content that you can consume and just educate yourself about the industry. So again, LinkedIn, Reddit, all of these different platforms can give you the who behind those searches, right? Behind the people who are putting that content out. And you can then connect the dots between the keyword research tool and these insights that you've picked.
And I will say too, especially since you brought up LinkedIn, because they're also another company that's just seen so much growth over the last few months with Google's recent algorithm update. I think they call it Pulse, like where you just upload an article to LinkedIn. And obviously with the authority LinkedIn has, chances are that article is actually going to end up ranking pretty well. So I think one of the things I'm also curious about is just how this is going to play out in the next few months, next year. Because obviously I think it is helpful to users. Like if you look at Google search data, like you said, most people are going to add Reddit to the end of their search. Like they want to see what people are specifically saying. But I'm curious to see if it's going to get to the point where with like LinkedIn and Reddit, if people are going to start like spamming those platforms with like pages that they know are going to rank and then just like spamming it with AI content because they know it's going to end up ranking. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out in the next couple of months.
For sure, it's already happening. By the way, Taylor, there are a lot of people spamming AI, Reddit with AI content. There's this whole thing of parasite SEO where the page that would rank in Google of Reddit, and they're trying to push the affiliate links that they can use to make money on referral, right? Whatever, all of that stuff. One thing that I'm seeing in general with all of these, let's of course it's AI content, but let's call it programmatic content in some sense, where companies are pushing a lot of content. So I'm just using the term programmatic. It's a different thing. But when I say programmatic here in this context, I mean companies pushing out a lot of content in a short span of time. One thing that I've noticed as a pattern in general is, of course, because Google is cautious towards AI content and the mass production of content in general these days, any company, even if it's an authoritative company, first sees a pretty big rise in traffic as soon as their pages are live, and then it sees a slow dip for the next couple of months. And then if it's a solid brand, if they've been doing things right for the past 5 to 10 years, and they have everything foundationally correct, then it ramps back up, right? So that's how I'm seeing the trajectory go, right? So it starts here, grows pretty well, then it sees a decline, and then it goes back up. It's true if you check, for example, the Ahrefs programmatic pages. It's true if you check the SEMrush programmatic pages, right? All of those website pages that we've published thousands of. It's true with LinkedIn advice pages, right? Those automation AI pages where you can contribute and you can receive a badge. And this is just a general pattern that I'm seeing. So what this tells to me is that Google is just a little cautious, even towards bigger brands. So they see and they test things with all of this mass production of content done by most of these companies. And then if things are still good, it makes sense for the users with all of that users testing on a large scale, they may ramp it up back again. Or for example, you might see what happened with SEO heist case study, right? So,
Oh yeah,
but
of
where it
course.
just like completely tanks. Yeah. So pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny you mentioned that because I actually checked that during the last podcast. I checked the whole SEO heist thing, and they still haven't recovered their traffic too. I think the website still has been issued a manual penalty, and they haven't recovered at all SEO wise.
Yeah. And generally speaking, I do think Jake Ward, for example, is a person, is a pretty smart guy. He, all of the stuff that he does, I have a lot of respect for him. In general, I think for anyone, using AI in content, or, just like mass producing content in any way, and they're trying to experiment with it, at this point, I wouldn't advise them to do it with a website they really care about. If it's an affiliate site, you're just like trying to make money and you can create a new one, even if it's like totally taxed down. Go ahead, no worries, nothing to worry about that much. But if it's a business that you're running and you have a reputation that you want to sustain over a long period of time, it's a very risky move at this point. And then what's even riskier is to actually talk about it openly on Twitter, right? Because that's what happened in that case. The site was actually going pretty well. I believe it would have still be dumped down by Google ultimately in some scenario, but I definitely think the kind of traction that post got, like millions of views, for sure speeded up the entire process.
Oh yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned that because like I mean just the whole like blowback that he got from it. Like I mean I think some of it might have been a little unwarranted because I did see that he was getting like death threats. People were like messaging him like telling him
Oh,
to like basically go like f himself. Like a lot of like backlash that came from that case study. But I think, like you said, with that visibility, like yeah, he probably won more people who were interested in the product. But at the same time, I guess the ROI definitely or the risk reward was definitely not there.
yep. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
So it looks like we are kind of running close to time. So I do have one final question, I guess, to cap off the episode. So if there was one thing that you could change about the entire SEO industry, one thing you just dislike and would hope it would change, what would you or what do you think that might be?
I would say if I could simply take away the stickiness with tactics within the industry, um, tactical thinking, if I could just replace it with strategic thinking, that would be one thing. So, and it's like an umbrella term. It includes so many things where you're just thinking of the client's objectives, what exactly they want to achieve. And then you see each of the opportunity that is available to you through the same filter. A very good example of this would be if you give an SEO specialist, you know, a, a person who has been running these tactical sort of SEO checklists to run the accounts, and you tell them, hey, we want to grow the average customer value of this project, right? And we want to grow the deal size. So it's not about getting more traffic. it's actually getting a different sort of traffic, right? The goal is not what they would understand properly. So what they might do is say, hey, we're going to create these pieces of content, we're going to fix these broken links, we're going to do this and do that. The problem actually lies in totally picking a different set of market and trying to capture that in terms of search, which means you have to think back, hey, what kind of content are we creating? Is our understanding of the enterprise companies that we want to attract now in order to grow the deal size different than the understanding that we have for normal customers, right? Shall we run some interviews and figure out how these two segments think differently, have different pain points, all of that stuff? So it's again a micro example, but if you just think about it, what this person would lack in this scenario, if they just run with tactical things, would be strategic thinking, right? They're not thinking about what the core objective is. So if they say, hey, we're gonna improve these title tags, like that would simply tell me they're still thinking about gaining more traffic, which is never the goal. The goal actually is to gain a different sort of traffic. The same goes for, if you tell someone, hey, we want to reduce churn, can you use SEO to do that? Like they would, in my opinion, totally blank out. Again, the strategy could be something like, hey, do we have these support pages that we can use and, create content on to answer questions around branded terms? Like, hey, if I'm targeting Hotjar, if I have Hotjar as a client, I would create content on how to do this with Hotjar, how to do that with Hotjar, and all of those branded terms that you can target in order to just reduce churn. So what this tells me is there's a high stickiness with tactical thinking and tactical behaviors, which I would totally take away if I had the opportunity and just implant this strategic mind in every SEO specialist.
Well, man, good thing we're both consultants. So definitely at least gives us some work to work with. But Usman, I don't know about you, but I thought this was a great talk. I really appreciated you come on here. You've been honestly a great guest so far. So really appreciate you taking the time with this.
Oh, thank you so much, Taylor. It's totally a pleasure. I loved the questions that you had, and I totally loved the level of depth that you've thought about these questions, these topics. I can totally see you've been paying attention to all of the stuff that I've done, which I always appreciate. When someone asks you questions, you really want those questions to be specific around the subjects that you are passionate about. So I really appreciate all of the time that you've put into this preparation.
Thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.